Hey, so because YouTube is... YouTube! I have to clarify that this video is not made for kids. Anyone of any age can honestly watch this video, but I have to clarify, otherwise this video will get restricted, that it's not made for kids. Anyways, hello, I'm Daze and this is Buddy Duck. Before we begin, I'd just like to say that there are no right or wrong ways to draw, well, anything. Art shouldn't be restricted in my opinion, so therefore, draw Sonic however the heck you want. I'm no Sonic expert. I'm just being modest, I totally am. This is just how I've learned how to draw him over the years, and I have a few friends who said they would love to see this video be made, so here we are. Plus, this is my first ever how to draw video, so please keep that in mind. With that said, on to the video. If you can draw basic characters such as Mickey Mouse, you can draw Sonic the Hedgehog. After all, his first design did take inspiration from classic cartoons. For some, Sonic's design may seem difficult to draw at first. Heck, you might just not know which Sonic you want to draw since there are so many versions of him at this point. That's what I hope to help with. Keep in mind that when drawing characters, it's wiser to start off drawing a base for the whole body, and then adding all of the details that make up the character afterwards. In this video, we won't be doing that. Instead, we will be going over one body part at a time, so as to not overwhelm anyone. If you're drawing on a physical canvas with a pencil, I must emphasize that it helps for you to start off drawing lightly so your lines are easier to erase. I myself will be drawing in the digital art program Procreate. This video will be fast-paced just like Sonic himself, so if you see this ring in the top left corner of the screen, that shows when it's a good time to pause the video and catch up. Now here's the important part. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Practice makes perfect, and with the right knowledge, you can create anything. Let's find ourselves a reference. This should do it. Today we'll be recreating this art of Sonic. It's his original design from the classic games, so this should be a good starting point. If you want to learn how to draw the different versions of Sonic, stay tuned. I promise it will help to watch the whole video instead of just skipping to the part that shows your favorite Sonic design. Let's draw the head first. We need a circle to start. Nothing fancy, just a ball which will serve as the guideline for his head. Then we add two intersecting guidelines to show where his head is facing. Moving on to Sonic's eyes, we'll draw two ovals as guidelines. Make sure they're tilted a little bit towards the center of the face. Keep in mind that these are just guidelines that we will draw over later. Sonic's eyes don't have to be, and most of the time aren't, perfectly round. Now we can connect them with a U-curve in the middle. The tip of the curve should meet with the middle guideline. It almost looks like he's wearing a fancy pair of sunglasses. Sonic has two eyes, but he has a very stylized design that has them squished together and combined. So let's erase the lines that separate his eyes. He's already starting to take shape. Now draw two ovals for pupils, and erase any part of the ovals that get cut off. Now we move on to the muzzle. We'll need to draw three more ovals. One here, and one here. Notice how the one in the middle is facing more vertically and the other two are facing more horizontally. Also take note of how the ovals intersect and where they are in relation to those two guidelines we added. Now we just remove the lines here that intersect. Then smooth out these corners here. Now we should have a smooth wavy line that creates the top of his muzzle. Clean up some of the line work and ta-da! Notice how Sonic's eyes and muzzle meet here and smoothly combine into one line. This isn't always necessary when drawing Sonic, but it creates a cleaner silhouette for his eyes. Silhouette in general is very important when drawing characters. When I show you this blot, who do you think of? Chances are you thought of Mickey, who was brought up earlier. Now who are you thinking of? I mean, just look at the video you're watching. It's Sonic. The pose and the general shape of the character automatically tell you who you're looking at without having to show you any detail. Also notice the very basic shapes that make up Sonic. Circles make up most of his body. This gives him a lot of smooth round edges, making him look more friendly and approachable, but triangles scattered about to show Sonic's more edgy side. Anyways, let's get back to drawing. Sonic's nose is just a simple oval. Sonic's muzzle isn't completely flat, so his nose goes out a bit in front of the center guideline instead of resting right on top of it. Now let's give him a smile. Well, that works. But most of the time, Sonic has a smirk that extends to the side of his face, like this. However, that can vary based on what expression you want him to pull. Now, you might have noticed that Sonic doesn't really have eyebrows. Instead, he has eyebrow ridges. There are these muscles that wrap around his eyes that can be thought of as tubes. To show this, we'll draw two lines above his eyes that follow the same curves. The ridge on the end of his face should end when it meets the circle guideline. Moving on from the face, let's draw guidelines for the ears. Draw two triangle guidelines at the edge of his head. Then smooth them out so they're more round. This ear is facing towards us, so let's draw the inside. Just draw the same shape on the inside, but close the shape with another curve. Now we move on to the spines. Some of you might be dreading this part. Just remember, practice makes perfect, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Sonic's quills go in an arc. To help show this, you can draw a curved guideline behind his head. I will not be doing that myself, but if you feel like you might need it, feel free to draw a guideline like this behind his head to indicate where the quills will be pointing. I found that it's easiest to go from bottom to top, but it doesn't really matter what order you draw his quills in. The bottom one will be the shortest, the middle will be the longest, and the top will be an in-between length, and connects to the edge of the head like so. If you have any issues with the shape of the quills, I like to imagine them as a bunch of shark fins. Hope that tip helps. After a few adjustments, erased lines, and highlights added to his eyes and nose, there's Sonic's head. Now time to explore Sonic's body. For his lower half, we just need to draw a smaller circle. It should overlap a bit with the head because Sonic doesn't really have a proper neck. Then just add an oval inside of that to show where his body is facing. And erase the overlapping lines. Sonic also has quills sticking out of his back. They would usually connect like this, but in this drawing, Sonic's head is facing a different direction than his body, so we'll have one separate small quill sticking out on this side. Sonic also has a thin pointy tail that sticks out in the back, so let's add that. To indicate where Sonic's arms and legs will go, let's add 4 little circle guidelines. Now for what is probably the most tricky part, hands. It's easier to make a pose look good by drawing the hands before the arms, but anyone who can pick up a pencil can tell you that drawing hands is difficult. Once again, let's not be afraid to make mistakes. It's not going to look perfect on your first try, and that's okay. First, let's draw a guideline to show where Sonic's gloved hand will be. We'll draw a tilted box next to Sonic's head. And we'll add a curved top here. Kinda looks like a piece of bread. Now let's do the fingers. We'll start with the outlines. Draw a line that loops around the box like so. Then erase some overlapping guidelines. Then we do the same but smaller for the thumb. Then erase some overlapping guidelines. Now we can divide Sonic's fingers, then erase the guidelines. Let's give his glove some added wrinkles. And voila! We have a fist. Now we connect that fist to the body. Draw 2 curved lines from Sonic's shoulder to his glove. Keep in mind that classic Sonic is in a rubber hose style. This means that his limbs can bend and curve in ways that in the real world would be unnatural. So sometimes instead of moving his arm bending like this, it'll bend like this. Sonic has a rolled up cuff on his glove. An easy way to think about the shape is 2 bagels stacked on top of each other. We'll draw 2 ovals, one on top of the other. Then erase the overlapping lines. Now we repeat this process for his other hand and arm. Draw a box guideline with a curved top. Add a guideline for the fingers. Divide those fingers. Erase the intersecting parts of the guidelines. Round it out a bit. Add a curve going from his fist to his shoulder. Erase overlapping lines. Add 2 ovals. And finally, refine and erase some lines. Ta-da! We've done it! Sonic now has 2 arms. Notice how his arm and hand here on our right is smaller than the one on our left? That's what we call perspective. Sonic's arm on our left is facing towards us. It's closer, so therefore it looks bigger. The one on our right is on his hip, which is a bit further, which makes it look smaller. Time for the final body part. We're going to draw Sonic's feet. DeviantArt is foaming at the mouth right now. Before we begin, I'd like to share a fun fact. Sonic actually wears boots. He just has them rolled up at the end. In the movie, this was changed to be a pair of sneakers with rolled up socks because, honestly, that's what most people assume they are anyways. Sonic's foot on our left is facing towards us like the hand on the same side. Let's start with a guideline in the shape of a trapezoid. Second, we'll start a curve going around the top. Third, we'll round it out with a soft point at the bottom. Erase the trapezoid and we have the basic shape. Let's draw 2 curves across the boot. This will be the bootstrap. Now, just like the arm, we'll draw 2 lines connecting the foot to the body. Make sure to erase the line separating the leg from the body. Now we add 2 ovals like we did for the gloves. Then add another oval inside for the hole in the top. Like I said, it kinda resembles a bagel. Erase the overlapping lines, and Sonic's first leg is done. I almost forgot, Sonic has a little golden buckle at the end of his bootstrap. We repeat these steps for the next foot. Draw a trapezoid, round it out, erase the trapezoid, Add a strap using 2 curved lines, connect it with a leg, but this time don't erase the line separating his leg and body. This adds depth. Add 3 ovals like so, then erase the overlapping lines. Presto! We just drew Sonic the Hedgehog. Now for colors. Gold for his buckle, peach for his ears, muzzle, belly, and arms, red for his boots, and white for his eyes, highlights, gloves, cuffs, and straps. And last but not least, color his body blue. Don't forget to sign your work. Now for the fun part. Draw Sonic however the heck you want. Draw him at different angles, give him different expressions and poses. Why not try doing him in a completely different art style? Don't be afraid to make mistakes and just have fun practicing. Speaking of which, Sonic's quills cause issues when viewed from the front. How do you draw them from a straight angle when they stick out the back of his head? Well, there are actually a few different ways of doing this, and it's up to preference. In Sonic's first official model sheet, his quills are drawn more similarly to how they would look in 3D. So from the front, they look like this, with the spine sticking out on both sides of his head slightly, and the one on top creating a pointed bump on Sonic's head. However, when it comes to a silhouette, this isn't as recognizable as this. I even have a plushie that does this, although from the back it doesn't look as good. Speaking of which, when viewed from the back, Sonic's quills have more depth. Sonic actually has 6 quills on the back of his head, and 2 on the back of his body. Not just the 4 uniform quills that all blend together as we can see from the side profile. Though sometimes stylization can be taken to the extreme, and he can still just have the usual 3 head quills and 1 back quill. On the topic of quills, these are Sonic's greatest weapon. Anytime you see Sonic jump in the games, he'll automatically roll his body into a ball. He can also do this to roll down hills and mow through badniks. In the games, this is shown as Sonic just transforming into a big blue ball, but usually when Sonic is in his spin dash form, artists will start with a simple circle as a base, but then add Sonic's quills rotating around the ball to emphasize what makes Sonic's spin dash so powerful. From the front, the spin dash should look a bit more like an oval, with spines being overlaid on top of each other. When Sonic is revving up his spin dash, you can see that this ball-like form leans forward a bit, taking on a more oval shape. This emphasizes how he's building up forward momentum until suddenly he's rolling around at the speed of sound. Speaking of which, when things get fast, sometimes images might get a bit blurry. So how do we portray that in a drawing? There are multiple ways, the first of which being that we draw multiple Sonics, because when things move fast, it can look like they're in multiple places at once. The most simple option is to just add motion lines, which are what they sound like. A bunch of lines that follow behind Sonic in whatever direction he's going in to emphasize his speed. If you want a more blurry look and you're working with certain art supplies or a digital art program, you can always smear part of your drawing, or if you want to be more methodical, you can add lines of color streaking off of Sonic. You can also always mix and match techniques depending on what your preferences are. When it comes to emphasizing speed, Sonic's legs can also get pretty distorted. For example, the faster Sonic's feet move, the more stretched and bent his shoes look in motion. And when his legs go super fast, suddenly you're finding his feet blur so much that they form a big red circle. Sometimes Sonic's legs even go so fast that they create a figure 8 shape, and his legs almost disappear entirely. Finally, before we move on, I'd like to emphasize practicing different hand poses using the technique that we practiced earlier. You might even be able to use your own hands as reference. I've only taught you how to draw Sonic in a specific pose. The rest is up to you. Moving forward, the rest of this video is a bit different. I won't really be giving instructions on how to draw what I show. Instead, we'll be going over all of the different versions of Sonic in chronological order, and I'll show you what's different about each design. Now that you've learned how to draw classic Sonic, with a bit of observation and practice, you should be able to apply what you've learned when drawing each version of Sonic. And if you have trouble with any of the designs shown, I'll also include a look at the guidelines for each one. I won't be talking about Super Sonic, because then I would have to do a section on each version of that form, which could be its own video. If you'd like to see that, leave a comment letting me know. I also won't be going over things such as the different ways artists have drawn him in the IDW comics, or the differences between Toei Sonic and OVA Sonic. If I went over every tiny detail tweaked by every artist who's ever drawn Sonic over the 30 years he's been around, we'd be here all day. With that said, let's do it to it.
Why can't it be more like that nice boy Mario?
The Sonic design we just went over might not actually be the one you're familiar with. If you're from the US, you might have grown up with a redesigned version of the character that's much more reminiscent of Bugs Bunny than Felix the Cat. This version of Sonic has wider eyes, This also came with a much more pronounced and furrowed eyebrow ridge. This version of Sonic was also given a wider, ever-present grin. He also had a bit of a longer snout, so his nose rests in a different position. He was given curvier and more pointed ears. The biggest change they made was the quills. These intersected with the head rather than following the curve of it, giving these the nickname Mohawk quills. Also, his back spines are longer, and his body is more egg-shaped, which is quite ironic. His limbs are now thicker, and no longer following the rubber hose stylization of Japan's Sonic. Also, he has no buckle. Depending on the artwork you're looking at, you might find artists combining traits from both designs. In the games Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces, classic Sonic's design is kind of an in-between of how Sonic looked in Japan and in the US. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. Switching back to Japan, Sonic got his own manga. Although this design stayed relatively the same as the original, in the manga, Sonic was actually the super-powered alter ego of Nicky the Hedgehog, who was just your average boy going through primary school. Nicky has a less stern look, wears glasses, has a tuft of hair on top of his head that has 3 points to match his quills, more round and soft-looking boots with laces instead of straps, and sometimes he wears a shirt that has the letter of his first name on it. Keep in mind that Nicky was featured in a primarily black and white manga, so when he was colored, it was wildly inconsistent. Nonetheless, I tried my best to color him in a way that's faithful to the source material. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. Returning from extended media, Sega hired Toei Animation to do a fully animated opening for Sonic CD, which featured this looser depiction of his Japanese design that strayed a bit from his Western inspiration. His eyes are a bit more narrow and expressive. His pupils have been thinned, his eyebrow ridge is made less prominent, and his nose was made smaller and given more of a bean shape. His quills are more messy but still follow the same arc pattern. His gloves were simplified, so when he balls his hands, the gloves look more like mittens. Although when he unballs his fists, his fingers separate again. The rolled part of his glove and boots were given less prominent wrinkles, and his boots were rounded out, the buckle being once again removed. This design has definitely become a fan favorite, and variations of it can be seen in the Sonic OVA, otherwise known as the Sonic the Hedgehog movie from 1999, and the animations done for Sonic Mania. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. Believe it or not, Sonic at some point had 2 separate cartoons airing at once. He was given wider, more expressive eyes with smaller pupils, ears that more resembled his Japan design, thicker quills that overlap with his head, a bigger muzzle, and a smaller nose. For his body, for some reason they removed his tail and replaced it with a second small back quill. Sonic was given more of a droopy-shaped body, even more so resembling an egg. And he was given thicker limbs to complement the new weighted body shape. His arms, now instead of being rounded out at the shoulders, have a more natural connection to the body. And finally, he was given 4 fingers instead of 5 so that he would be easier to animate. This design went on to be used in animated specials, TV promos, and comics. This will always be my personal favorite version of Sonic. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. In the UK, Sonic got his own comic separate from the Archie comics we got in the US. They started off using the same design as the cartoons, but over time his design became more unique. He was given more narrow and intense eyes. His face was flattened a bit, and his smirk was also toned down. His ears were longer, along with his quills, which were closer to how they looked on the Japan design, but looking much more messy and pointy this time around. Sonic once again is given 5 fingers on each hand. His rubber hose limbs make a comeback, and he gets his tail back. His boots were made stubbier, and the wrinkles on the rolled up parts of his gloves and boots were made less prominent, similar to the Toei design. Despite his more mean-spirited personality presented in the Fleetway comics, this version of Sonic has many fans, including myself. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them.
Is happening.
We're back to the evolution of Sonic in the games, and Sonic has certainly evolved. In Sonic's first proper 3D platformer, he was given a drastic redesign. His furrowed brow from the US redesign was made more prominent. He was given proper irises, which I'm sure you know by now are green. His ears were made bigger and less soft. They also follow a curve similar to the quills. This version of Sonic can often be seen giving a toothy grin. He was also given a bean-shaped nose and longer quills. Also, Sonic has a slimmer bean-shaped body with a constantly puffed out chest, which can also be broken down into 2 circles connected with 2 curved lines. To match his lost weight and longer quills, Sonic's limbs now grew in length, and his shoes were given some silver-colored soles. This design stayed mostly consistent throughout the Dreamcast era, with a variation of it being seen in the anime Sonic X. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. Of all games, the Sonic design that is still used today was introduced in the spin-off game Shadow the Hedgehog. You know, the one with the guns? This design features a more flat-looking muzzle, a less stylized grin, a smaller nose, wider eyes with less exaggerated eyebrow ridges, and thinner pupils. He was given stiffer, rounded-out ears, with the quills following suit, and no more rubber hose stylization. His puffed-out chest and arched back is less exaggerated, his shoes are more rounded out, and curve up a bit at the front ends. Finally, his hands and feet were made a bit bigger. Seeing as it's only been tweaked over time, this much less stylized design seems to be here to stay for all mainline games yet to come. Do you think that's a good thing or not? I'm curious what you all have to say in the comments. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. At some point, Sega wanted to revamp the Sonic series with a new spin-off series that drastically differed from the main series, and the character designs reflected this. Sonic was first off given more expressive eyes with less prominent brow ridges, and messier quills. For some reason they decided to give Sonic a proper neck, but thankfully covered up that hideous neck with a brown bandana. Sonic's body is a bit bigger in this design, and to match, his arms were made longer, and they were turned blue, so let's erase the lines separating his arms from the body. Of course the legs were also made longer. His boots were made round, with removed buckles and straps. And to make up for this, they added these gold accents that stick out the top of his shoes. He was also given athletic tape that wrapped around his gloves, shoes, wrists, and ankles. He was also given this little wristband, which in the games gives him an electric whip. I don't know, maybe that tape doubles as something else. Anyways, here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them.
Meow?
And so we come to our final design. Sonic was given a drastic redesign for his first blockbuster film. Basing his design off what we have in the games now, his head was shrunk, his eyes were made narrower, and they were separated to make him look more realistic. Keep in mind that even though the eye shape you're seeing looks like this, his eyebrow ridges go over his eyes, and underneath he has more almond-shaped eyes like this. Sonic's jawline and cheeks were made more defined to once again add realism. His nose was made shorter, and his mouth is more centered, but can still stretch across his face to resemble that iconic side smirk. His muzzle now has a more natural transition between the peach and blue-colored fur. If you're wondering how I achieved this natural fur look, I basically just drew lines with sharp squiggles like this. This version of Sonic was given smaller, more pointed ears that point forward a bit, and shorter quills, although his back quills basically stay the same length. Now this version of Sonic has actual individual quills that bunch together to create the big, iconic spines on his back. To achieve this detail, I found it best to methodically add lines going across his spines, along with a few poking out here and there. Moving on to the body, Sonic's shoulders were raised, and he was given thicker arms that taper off and become slightly bigger at the wrists and shoulders than at the elbow. He was also given smaller and more realistic human hands with skinnier fingers, and his rolled-up glove cuffs now have more detailed, imperfect wrinkles. His peach-colored chest is now bigger and has the same fur texture as his muzzle. His legs were made thicker following the same rules as his arms, and his rolled-up boots were replaced with Puma sneakers with some thick rolled-up socks. Notice how the shoes curve up even more at the ends than previously. Here's some rough guidelines if you want to study them. And that is the one and only Sonic made for the movie. There is no other version. This is the last design that I have to draw for this video. There's no other. Don't ask me for anything ever again. So that's it. We've gone over pretty much every Sonic design. There were a few other designs as mentioned earlier that weren't included because they didn't have enough to differentiate them from the other designs. Either they be stylized 3D models, or just modern Sonic with different sneakers and gloves. I sent an early version of this video to a few of my friends and family, and here's some of the work they made. Check it out. I'm curious, who would you all like to see a tutorial on next? Tails, Amy, Silver, Shadow, or maybe you'd like to see characters from other series? A certain bear comes to mind for me. I would love to see some of you send in your drawings of Sonic. You can find me on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and even Threads. Now that you've watched my video, I'd like to encourage you to watch similar videos about Sonic made by other people. As stated before, there's not really any right or wrong ways to draw Sonic, so why not see how other people draw him and take inspiration from them? I just hope that this video can inspire you to experiment, because sometimes drawing a character just one way all the time can get boring, and I think making art should be fun most of the time. Anyways, thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.